A crowd of senior mechanics stood frozen around a prototype engine no one could fix. Then, a teenage girl in torn jeans walked in. The boss laughed, dared her to try, and handed her a wrench. What happened next not only humiliated the experts, it uncovered a secret they were never supposed to know. This is the story of how a mechanic's daughter exposed a multi-million-dollar lie with nothing but her hands and her father's teachings. Stay till the end, because what she finds under the hood doesn't just fix the engine, it changes everything. The morning air was still heavy with mist as Sierra Maddox, just 13, stepped into her father's old garage, Maddox Auto Repairs, a place that smelled of oil, metal, and years of honest labour. Her hoodie hung loosely on her shoulders, her sneakers dusty, and her hands already smudged with grease. She wasn't supposed to be there that day. Executives from Wilcore Motors were visiting, and her father had warned her to stay out of the way. But Sierra had a feeling, a gut instinct, that something important was about to happen. When the black SUV arrived at exactly 8:00 a.m., all conversation stopped. Out stepped Mr. Callister, a tall, sharply dressed man with slick hair, polished shoes, and a reputation that echoed across the automotive world. He didn't shake hands or smile. He looked around as if disgusted by the shop's modest walls and flickering lights. Behind him, a team wheeled in a covered engine block, a prototype no mechanic had managed to fix. Sierra watched from the shadows, unnoticed, until her elbow bumped into a metal bucket. The sudden clang broke the silence like a gunshot. Heads turned. Callister's eyes narrowed on her. "Whose kid is this?" he barked, amused. No one answered. Then he smirked. "Let's give the mechanic's daughter a chance. Maybe she's got magic in her dirty little fingers." The room chuckled nervously. Sierra's father stepped forward to stop it, but she raised her hand calmly. She stepped toward the engine. Everyone expected her to hesitate or touch the wrong component, but Sierra didn't flinch. She placed her hand on the engine's surface, closed her eyes for a brief second, and began to speak. Her voice didn't waver. "This engine isn't broken," she said slowly. "It's pretending to be." Silence followed. Mechanics exchanged glances. Mr. Callister's amused smirk faded. "Excuse me," he said sharply. Sierra opened her eyes and pointed to the diagnostic console. "Look at the error loop. It's not random. Someone coded it to simulate failure." Now every technician leaned in. The fuel injection delay isn't from a faulty injector. It's from a recursive code cycle. "This engine is programmed to stall," she continued, confidently. Her father stared at her like she was speaking another language. Callister stepped closer, voice low but threatening. "Who told you that?" Sierra met his gaze without blinking. "No one," she said. "But someone wants you to think this engine's defective. It's a cover-up." The entire room stood in stunned silence. The diagnostics console beeped. One of the senior engineers typed in the sequence she suggested. The console lit up. She was right. The engine, thought to be a failure, was functioning fine once the fake code was bypassed. A slow gasp spread across the room. Callister stepped back, visibly shaken. Suddenly, the entire atmosphere shifted. Mechanics who had mocked her now stared with awe. The camera crew, initially there to record the executive tour, had just captured something none of them expected: a teenage girl uncovering corporate sabotage. Sierra didn't celebrate. She simply walked back to her father's side, her eyes filled with something far older than her years. Callister, now speechless, nodded once to his assistant, who immediately began whispering into a phone. What had started as a joke had become a moment of reckoning. Sierra Maddox didn't just fix an engine. She exposed a secret that could shake Wilcore Motors to its core. And while most adults were still trying to catch up with what had just happened, Sierra quietly wiped her hands on a rag and went back to organizing tools, like it was just another morning in the shop. But nothing would be the same after that. Not for Sierra, not for her father, and definitely not for Mr. Callister. The silence in the garage felt like a vacuum, pressing in on everyone, swallowing sound and breath alike. Sierra's words still hung in the air. This engine isn't broken. It's pretending to fail. No one moved. Callister's sunglasses had come off, his polished confidence cracked just slightly, his fingers twitching by his side. A junior technician stepped forward to the console, tapping in the diagnostic loop Sierra had mentioned. Beep, beep. Then green. The system stabilized. The engine's warning codes vanished. Sierra had been right. Something no engineer, no software analyst, no corporate executive had caught. A 13-year-old had unraveled in seconds. Her father looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Callister, stunned into silence, gave a tight nod to his assistant, who left the room with hurried steps and a phone already to his ear. No applause, no congratulations, only stunned disbelief. The girl who wasn't supposed to be there had changed everything in one breath. But beneath the surface, tensions cracked open like a fault line. A few older mechanics, once dismissive, now looked nervous. They had seen engines fail before, ones they couldn't explain. Could this be part of something bigger? Sierra walked away from the engine quietly, her shoulders square, her hands steady. But something tugged at her, an odd sense that this was far from over. As she returned to the corner where her tools were, she overheard two Wilcor engineers whispering, one saying, "If she's right, the whole line may be compromised." The other simply nodded grimly. Her father noticed too. He didn't speak, just placed a hand on her shoulder, like he knew something dangerous had just begun. Meanwhile, Callister stepped outside, lit a cigarette with trembling hands, and stared at the sky. He knew now what Sierra had revealed wasn't just a glitch. It was a cover-up, one he thought had been buried deep. Someone inside Wilcor had tampered with a prototype engine meant for mass production. If that code had gone undetected, it would have ruined thousands of vehicles, or worse, put lives at risk. Inside the shop, the crew began to disassemble the engine carefully, their motions slow, cautious, like surgeons handling a live wire. Sierra watched every step, her instincts alive. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about truth. And truth, she realized, scared people more than failure ever could. Her father pulled her aside. "Sierra," he said, voice low, "what you did, it might make enemies." She didn't flinch. "Then we fix what's broken, right?" He smiled weakly, proud and terrified. But even before he could respond, a black car rolled into the garage lot. Government plates, tinted windows. A man in a grey suit stepped out, holding a folder. "Mr. Callister," he called, "we need to talk. Now!" Sierra's eyes met her father's. Something bigger was unfolding. Her discovery had pulled back a curtain on more than just an engine glitch. It had triggered a chain reaction, the kind no one could control now. The air was thick with tension as the man in the grey suit stepped deeper into the garage, his leather shoes leaving no sound on the concrete. In his hand was a slim black folder, one that looked ordinary but pulsed with importance. Mr. Callister straightened his tie instinctively, masking the worry behind a neutral face. Sierra stood beside her father, half hidden behind a workbench, her gaze locked on the folder. Something about it made her chest tighten. The man spoke with a calm, government-practiced authority. "Mr. Callister, we've received a tip about compromised engineering data from Wilcor's internal division. You were named." That single sentence shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. Callister didn't react, not with shock nor denial. Instead, he held out his hand and said, "Let's talk in my office." The man didn't move. "We'll talk here. The whistleblower's file includes this facility and this engine." Gasps moved through the mechanics. The engine, still partly disassembled, now stood at the center of a growing storm. Sierra's father instinctively moved in front of her. "Sir, she's just a kid." But the agent wasn't looking at Sierra. He was staring at the engine like it held answers to a much older question. Slowly he opened the file. Diagrams, emails, screenshots, pages that looked like they belonged inside a courtroom, not an auto shop. Sierra edged closer, curiosity overpowering fear. On one page, she spotted the signature, Wilcor's lead systems architect. Another bore a red stamp, suppress, internal use only. Her breath caught. These weren't just specs. These were cover-ups. Intentional design flaws coded to fail after 1,000 hours of use. Safety overrides bypassed. Legal memos warning of plausible deniability. It wasn't just an engine they were looking at. It was the beginning of a scandal. Callister's voice cracked through the silence. "This is classified. Where did you get that?" The man replied evenly, "From someone inside your company. Someone who knew this was more than just an experiment." Sierra's father clenched his jaw. The garage, once a safe haven of oil and gears, now felt like a war zone. Outside, more unmarked cars pulled in. A man with a camera. Another with a badge. Word was spreading, and then something no one expected. Sierra spoke. Her voice was steady, but loud enough to command the room. "I can prove this engine was sabotaged from the start. I saw the loop. And there's more. It wasn't just programmed to fail, it was programmed to hide the failure." Her words hit like thunder. The government man turned to her, not dismissively, but with curiosity. "Can you show me?" he asked. Her father's hand shook as he passed her the diagnostic tablet. Sierra knelt beside the engine again, this time not alone, but under the gaze of agents, engineers, and men in suits. She worked in silence, rewinding the software log, bypassing the visual interface. Line by line, she exposed the trap buried deep in code, a reroute script that mimicked normal engine activity while initiating wear on fuel pressure sensors. "Here," she pointed, "see this line? It loops false data back to the central unit. It thinks everything's fine while damage builds up inside." The room fell into stunned silence. One agent cursed under his breath. Callister stepped back, as if the truth had struck him physically. This wasn't supposed to come out," he muttered. The man with the file closed it quietly. "And yet, here we are." The garage was no longer a garage. What once smelled of grease and rust now stank of politics, fear, and quiet accusations. It had become a scene of federal inspection. Toolboxes remained untouched, mechanics stood idle, and Sierra Maddox sat quietly on an upturned milk crate, a worn laptop on her knees and her father beside her. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her actions from earlier had already written the headlines. News trucks were outside, drones buzzed above for aerial coverage, but Sierra wasn't basking in attention. She was calculating, wondering who would come for her next, because truth never goes unpunished, especially when it exposes millions in corporate fraud. Her father had barely slept. He paced the shop, checking on his crew who were now giving half-hearted interviews to reporters. Some avoided eye contact. Others, especially the older mechanics, whispered when Sierra passed by. What had started as reluctant awe now simmered with something else: fear, resentment, change. She was 13, and yet she had done what no one else had dared, and in doing so, she had made enemies. That morning, Sierra had received 3 emails from unknown addresses. One told her to stay quiet for your family's sake. Another said, "What you found is dangerous. Walk away." And the third, without text, was just a still frame from the garage's security footage of her touching the engine, circled in red. She didn't show her father, not yet. Instead, she turned back to the schematics. What she found the day before had been just one layer. Wilcor Motors had built not 1 but 3 engines with faulty AI logic. They called it adaptive efficiency, But in Sierra's eyes, it was disguised obsolescence, a way to make engines wear themselves down, forcing early replacements. And those replacements, all through Wilcor's own premium service centres. The perfect money loop. But greed rarely hides cleanly. Sierra began tracking code updates through anonymous repositories, and that's when she saw it. A hidden server ping, coming from a facility outside Phoenix. It wasn't a Wilcor plant. It was listed under a dummy logistics company. She copied the server address and logged off. Her fingers shook. This wasn't just about engines anymore. That night, her father finally cornered her. "Sierra," he said, his voice tight, "what aren't you telling me?" She hesitated, but he already knew. "I saw the emails, the threats." She blinked. He added, "You're my daughter. I've known since the day you were born when something's wrong." For a second, Sierra wanted to cry. But instead, she opened her laptop, turned it toward him, and showed him the Phoenix data trail. "It's bigger than this garage, Dad," she whispered. "They're still hiding something." He looked at the screen, his jaw set. "We go to the feds," he said. "No," Sierra replied. "We go there, ourselves." He wanted to argue, but he saw that spark in her eyes, the same one her mother once had. Reluctantly, he nodded. The next morning, long before sunrise, Sierra and her father packed the old pickup and began driving south. The desert stretched out before them like an open secret. As they neared the Phoenix outskirts, the GPS led them to a fenced-off complex disguised as a distribution center. But it wasn't moving packages. It was hiding servers. And maybe evidence. They parked a block away, ducked into shadows, and waited. Sierra had hacked into a side security feed, using tools she had modified from old diagnostic scanners. "This door," she said, pointing. "There's no guard rotation for 12 minutes. Her father stared at her in disbelief. "You're 13, he muttered. She smiled faintly. "That's why they never see me coming." Inside, the building hummed with cold air and high voltage. No boxes, no conveyor belts, just screens, rows of them, and servers, stacked like skyscrapers. Sierra moved quickly. Her instincts told her exactly what to look for. Her fingers flew across the terminal. Passwords were weak. Complacency made people lazy. Within minutes she was in, and what she found stopped her breath. Not just one engine, not even 100. Thousands, each tagged with software flaws hidden under performance modules. More than that, documents outlining strategies to delay diagnostics, to quietly recall faulty parts without public notice, and internal memos discussing how to blame user error if accidents occurred. Her father paled. "They were going to let people die," he whispered. Just then, a red light blinked. Motion sensors. Security was inbound. "Copy the data," her father barked. She yanked the drive out and shoved it into her pocket. "Go!" Alarms screamed as they ran. Back through the side door, across the gravel, into the pickup. Tires squealed. Headlights behind them lit up. But they made it out, barely. And now they had the proof. But that night, as Sierra sat on a motel bed staring at the USB drive, she knew something else. This wasn't a victory. Not yet. Exposing this would mean war, with lawyers, with corporations, maybe even with governments. But she also knew something else. Staying silent was never an option. Truth was her responsibility now. And truth, no matter how dangerous, had to be told. Rain fell on the courthouse steps like a warning. Dark clouds churned above, as if the sky itself knew what was coming. Sierra Maddox, 13 years old, stood silently beside her father, clutching a small black flash drive, the very drive that could topple Wilcor Motors. Around her, cameras clicked, journalists pushed microphones forward, and news tickers ran her name like wildfire. But Sierra wasn't there for headlines. She was there to finish what she started. It had been 2 weeks since she and her father broke into the Phoenix facility. 2 weeks of hiding, encrypted emails, meetings with federal agents, and sleepless nights. And now they were here, about to testify before a congressional committee investigating corporate negligence, planned obsolescence, and consumer fraud at a level no one had dared confront before. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Seats were packed, reporters lined the back wall, and every major news channel was live. Wilcor's executives sat in tailored suits, flanked by lawyers who looked more like assassins. Mallister wasn't there. Rumours said he'd resigned or been forced out. Sierra scanned the room, her fingers twitching slightly. Then they called her name. She walked to the microphone. No podium, no desk, just her, a small chair, and a room full of powerful people waiting to see if she would crumble under the weight of her own truth. She didn't. Instead, she began with her father's name. "My dad taught me that engines don't lie. People do." There was a silence that fell like stone. "I'm not an engineer. I'm not a scientist. I'm a mechanic's daughter, and I found something that everyone else was paid not to find." Her voice didn't shake. She explained the false diagnostic codes, the deliberately failing engines, the cover-ups. She played the files on screen, one after the other. Internal memos, emails, coding evidence. Thousands of vehicles compromised. Sierra ended with a simple line. "If I could find it, so could they. They just didn't want to." What followed was chaos. The senators debated. Executives denied. Lawyers objected. But the data spoke louder than they ever could. Sierra's testimony made headlines in every major paper within hours. Social media exploded. Petitions launched, stock prices fell, and behind it all, Sierra quietly walked away with her father, unnoticed, uncelebrated, but deeply proud. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. 2 weeks later, they returned to Maddox Auto Repairs. The garage had been quiet, business slower than ever. Customers were scared, locals whispered. But that morning, as Sierra opened the rusted gate, something changed. One by one, cars began pulling in. First an old man with a sputtering truck, then a mother with a van that needed brakes, then a young woman in a Wilcor SUV. She stepped out, smiled, and said, "I saw your daughter on TV. I figured I could trust you more than anyone." Her father chuckled. "You figured right." Inside, Sierra cleaned her tools. She wasn't famous here. She wasn't a hero. She was just a girl with grease on her hands and too many thoughts in her head. But as she looked at her reflection in the dusty mirror, she smiled for the first time in weeks. Because the truth had cost her something. Safety, normalcy, maybe even innocence. But it had also given her something bigger. Purpose. That night she sat under the stars, a journal in her lap. On the first page she wrote, "Truth isn't easy. It's a wrench in the gears, but it makes the whole machine better." The story was over, but Sierra Maddox's fight had just begun. Some stories aren't just meant to be told at all. They're meant to be felt. Sierra Maddox wasn't a genius, or a hero, or someone born to stand in the spotlight. She was just a mechanic's daughter who chose to stand up when no one else would. If this story moved you, if you believe in truth, courage, and the power of standing for what's right, then don't let this be the last time we connect. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to HOA Stories for more real, raw, and powerful stories that go deeper than headlines. Because in a world full of noise, we bring you what matters, one story at a time. Until next time, remember, some stories aren't fiction. They're warnings, or hope, or both. Or